if I record and then...
Yeah, I think it still goes.
Yeah, that's still going. Alright, we're going to record from now. We're wasting time, and I'm going to upload this to YouTube. We have everything out.
I'm sure this is O2.
Does it start at 3:20?
It's not yet 4:05.
3:05.
Yeah, that's late, right?
Huh? 你也来啊? No, I'm not. I'm going to go home.
Oh, I think it's good.
你是谁当的?
Yeah, why is it good? Hello? Yeah, hello, where are you? Why are you?
Hey, folks.
Hello.
Hello. Anybody else coming for this? Miki's coming or not coming? No? So this is it? Sorry. Winnie, you changed your hair. Hello, you're right. Sorry, but I don't recognise him. Sorry, the name is Brian, yes, sorry, Brian. Seems like a lifetime ago. Teaching 12 weeks. Right, Winnie and Brian, right, I see you. We need that. Right. I think the plan was, or is, to have a bit of a look at something new. Has anybody had a look at that theory of the third stuff?
I'll look at it closer.
Making progress?
A little bit.
I mean, you know, it's a big ask that you just go through and think, yeah, right, that's interesting. There's a lot there. So, unfortunately, we don't have time available to teach through that. You know, it's a 5-week piece of work for a year 13 class. So, you know, it's no point me just sitting here trying to teach you in 20 minutes. So, what I'm thinking is we might dive into a question that makes some use of it, and maybe we'll start with the answers and we'll work back from there and try and fill in the well, why is that the answer stuff, rather than starting with all the why, and then, you know, it'll be bloody December by the time we get to the answer. So how does that sound? We'll jump into a question, right, and we'll see how we go. So yeah, let's have a look at. Hopefully, I've still got it here somewhere. So we'll have a look at it's a 2020 paper. We'll have a look at question 1, which is a market structures question. Market structures comes up pretty much every year. Market structures. So it's question 1, 2020. And it's quite a nice little question. I mean, you know, I think if you had done this unit at school and been taught it, you'd probably have been thinking, yes, thank God. This is reasonably straightforward, so I think it's probably not a bad place to start. So let's have a look at question. What am I doing? That's what I need to do. You could go to, there's a link in Google Classroom for the NZQA website. You could go there and open the material for the 2020 past paper, because it's got the question paper, the resource booklet, and there are some exemplars and stuff as well. Winnie and Brian, you weren't here last time I was here, but one of the problems we had in teaching Scholarship Eco is, in their wisdom, NZQA blank out most of the resource booklet, which is like just, but they say they don't have copyright. So how did they manage to publish the exam in the first place is always a mystery to me, and it's a question they've never answered. But anyway, the resource booklet's not much use to us. But in Google Classroom, in the Scholarship Classroom, I have posted links from where they got the information for the resource booklet. So I think we can fill in the gaps reasonably well, if that makes sense. Am I making sense?
Yeah.
Cool. All right. If I'm not making sense at any point, you really have to just say, what? It's okay, I'm not going to be offended. In fact, I'd be pleased, because it means we can clarify stuff. If I'm just talking for an hour, it's going to be terribly tedious. So let's have a look at this question. Have I got it here? No, not yet. Let's get that on the screen. Right, there we go. So here's the question. It's about the courier industry. I mean, just from your general knowledge, how do you think the courier industry has developed over time? Are we using them more or less?
Probably more, because like more online.
Bang on. I mean, that's the basic premise behind the question. So we're using couriers more often. Online shopping is a big deal. Do you think there are more courier firms or less?
It's more.
Well, yeah, I think these are good links to make. So what the resources basically say, to save us going through them all in massive detail, is the industry started very small, one company back in the 60s, I think it was, and has grown steadily, and then with online shopping has grown quite rapidly, and there are now, I think, something like 3,000 firms apparently in New Zealand. I mean, wow, that's a lot. Courier firms just in New Zealand. So the industry's grown a lot. So the question basically asks you to examine the market structure of the courier industry. And helpfully in the resource booklet, which I also have I've got here, in the resource booklet, it says, refer to resources A to D. Resource A gives us part of the answer in a way. So I suppose exam tip number one, if you're going to do the STOL exam, is hello, we're just getting going. Exam tip number one will sound ridiculously obvious, but let me emphasise it. Read the whole question, including headings, and read the resource booklet before you start answering. Because if you had just gone to the question paper and tried to answer that, you might not even have addressed the four market structures that they're interested in, because it just says four market structures, and it's only when you read the resource booklet that it specifies what they're after. So, market structures is about these structures here. Have you covered this at all in class?
No.
No, right. So what do we know about this? Well, if I asked you what a monopoly is, what's a monopoly?
When they have like the largest market share.
A monopoly. So we could even say, at least in theory, a single seller. So in a market, so this is the market for courier firms, right, in the question. If you want to open this stuff, it's in the classroom. Yeah, right, that's fine. So a monopoly single seller. or actually in reality it could be very large market share. Very large market share. There are different definitions of what market share makes up a monopoly. It could be 35%, could be 50%, depends on the text that you read, but it's a very dominant market share. And also has very high barriers to entry. Barriers to entry, these are things that stop competitors getting into the market. Hey folks. Well, you've missed a bit already. Well, you've missed a bit already, I'm not repeating. So, high barriers to entry. What sort of things might prevent... Hey boys, sorry, I don't know you what's going on.
Oh, am I allowed to just sit?
Yeah, are you doing school eco?
Oh, no, I'm just here.
Oh,
I just think
what's your name?
Siri.
Siri, right, nice to see you. What sort of thing might stop competition coming into a market?
If it's like too expensive
In what sense?
to like get the business started.
So, e.g. setup costs, let's call it setup cost. Yeah. Specifically for a career business, what sort of thing might that be, setup costs? What do you need to set up a career business?
Vehicles.
Vehicles. Vans, vehicles, yeah. What else? Do the vehicles drive themselves? Fuel, yeah.
Labour.
Labour, yeah. Drivers, qualified trained drivers, not trained drivers, trained drivers. So setup costs, yeah, could be something like that. So let's just talk quickly about oligopolies. So you should be making a few notes, I think, folks. A few sellers. So let's just stick with sort of simple concepts. Monopoly, single seller, one business in the market. Oligopoly, it's a weird word. It's actually Greek, I think. I think the oli part of it's Greek. The poly might be Latin. It might be a combination from memory. But anyway, oligopoly means a few sellers, a few. And that in economics is not defined. So it could be, it could be 2 or 3, it could be 5 or 6, but the key point would be they have a dominant market share. So let's say it's 5 firms with let's say it's 5 firms with 2/3 of the market between them. So oligopoly is a few sellers. This term here, monopolistic competition, why economists have settled on a word that sounds like monopoly to basically mean something that's not monopoly, I don't know. It's just unhelpful. But so monopolistic competition, there would be many sellers in the market, but they would each have a little bit of pricing power over their product. Perfect competition. Down at the other end of the scale, perfect competition. Many, many sellers, all the products are identical, they have no pricing power, there are no barriers to entry. So you could actually think about it like this. Perfect competition. Monopolistic competition. Oligopoly. Monopoly. Do you know what the word homogeneous means? The same, identical, right? No difference between them. So probably better to lay it out like this, I think. Right, there's a little summary. So let's just make that a bit clearer. So there's our sort of quick summary of market structures. If you were a little bit late, what I said is market structures comes up basically in every scholar exam. It's a really popular topic. So knowing that, this is quite useful. So that's a little summary of the differences. We could also add something else in, actually. Have you heard of this term? Allocatively efficient. Have you heard of that term? Allocative efficiency?
Yeah, we didn't
You
like
covered that? Fantastic, right. So, perfect competition. Its biggest benefit, if you like, is that it's allocatively efficient, which is good for society. So, the surplus, if you like, for CS and PS are maximised. That's why perfect competition is a good thing. We can also say that it's a theoretical benchmark. So there aren't any really good examples of a perfectly competitive market in the real world, because you could say all markets have some sort of feature like this, a little bit of product differentiation, some barriers to entry. There aren't many, if any, that have all the conditions of perfect competition. So it's useful as a theoretical benchmark against which to compare real-life markets. That's the idea. But it's allocatively efficient, that's the key thing. These markets are not allocatively efficient. Can I just use the shortening AE, not AE? So in theory, these three markets are not so good because they're not as competitive, so society misses out a bit. CS and PS are not maximised in those markets. This is why there's always a question about it, by the way, because it's an important issue for real life. In real life, the government wants to get probably all markets that we have in New Zealand heading in this direction so that they're becoming more allocatively efficient. We have markets down this end of the scale which leave consumers probably worse off, and that's why we often legislate against them. So anyway, there's a little sort of summary of the background to this question. There are some graphs that you need to know how to draw. notes. I wonder if we should take a photo and stick it on the... Have you got a photo of that? Could you stick it on the classroom, the school classroom? And we'll get rid of that and just draw a couple of graphs. If you are late, sorry, what I said was that the teaching behind this is like 5 weeks of teaching. So we're going to start with the answers and work backwards to the why is that the answer rather than do all the why first. Otherwise we'll just be here till December. You did get a photo, didn't you? Yeah. Excellent. So, let's do a bit of graph drawing. So, perfect competition. Perfect competition. Let's have a look at this. So, make sure that you've got these graphs side by side, otherwise this won't work. So in these graphs, folks, what we want to have is an equilibrium that is at the same level in each graph. And I'll explain why in a second. Sorry. So that's what we want. Oh, we are chucking a lot. Never tried teaching this course in 20 minutes. This is an interesting challenge. Right. Can you try and get all of that in your notes, and then I'm going to talk you through it, and I promise it will make a little bit of sense by the time we get to the end. It is a big download, what we've got here, but we'll try and make some sense of it. Right, how are we going? Have we managed to get this down? Sorry, no, fine. Keep going, keep going. It will make sense when we have a look at question 2, because effectively this is the answer to the question. Sean, did you manage to upload that photo? Well, just, if you could chuck it up there while we're thinking about it, that would be awfully handy. Thank you. What did you do last week?
We looked at practice, like some past questions.
On?
I think I should pick all of them.
Lectures. Just interested to talk. So let's have a quick talk through this, because I'm mindful that you folks will want to go home, like me. So, in that other board work that you just took notes of, or we've got a photograph of, we started, didn't we, on this end of the scale with perfect competition. We said, this has got the most competition, it's allocatively efficient. And we went down to this end of the scale and we said, one seller, not allocatively efficient. Good for society, not so good. That's sort of essentially where we got to. So in terms of modelling this is the model that you expect to know in terms of competition. Key points. A firm in a perfectly competitive market is a price taker. They have no price setting power. Why? Because there are many, many, many firms all selling an identical product and there are no barriers to entry. And so that leaves us with firms as a price taker, and the price is set in the market for the product. So all the firms in the market take the price set in the market by market supply and market demand. So what we've got here is a picture of the market for whatever product it is. What was my favourite thing in year 12? Spicy noodles? Did I put that on the board? Maybe we hadn't done like that. I don't know. Anyway, this could be the market for spicy noodles, and we've got spicy noodle providers here, let's say restaurants or sellers of 2-minute noodles or something. So the market sets the price for the product, and that price is carried over for the firm and becomes the price that the firm can charge for its product. They can't charge more than that because they're a price taker. If they try and charge more, they'll sell no product. At that price, they can sell all of their output. And we can add this sort of bendy line, this curve, for something called average costs. And average costs in microeconomics are total costs, which include fixed costs and variable costs. So fixed costs could include things like rent for the business. Variable costs change with output. Change with output. Do not change with output. So fixed costs don't change no matter how many packets of spicy noodles you make. That could be something like rent for the factory. Doesn't change regardless of your output. Variable costs do change with output, and that could be inputs. So things that you're using to make the product, obviously the cost of those change, and would also include things like labour costs, the number of workers you've got, so it could include labour costs. So total costs are made up of fixed and variable costs. Average cost is total cost divided by output. This is good sort of microeconomic stuff that you probably haven't covered. But it gives us a curve shaped like that. It's always drawn this way. We've got a second curve that looks a bit like a Nike swoop, and it's actually the same as the supply curve in graphs that you've already drawn, but it just has a slightly different beginning shape to it, which we don't normally draw for supply curves, with a marginal cost cost curve, it's always a Nike sort of swoop. The marginal cost curve. Marginal cost is the change in total cost divided by the change in output. And so think of it as the cost of making the next or the marginal unit, the last unit of production. The cost will be described as the marginal cost. It's the cost of making that final unit of output. And it's always shaped like that. Stuff you've just got to know and remember because we don't have time to teach the why. The intersection of average cost and marginal cost is always at AC's lowest point. So you would always draw the intersection where marginal cost and average cost intersect at the lowest point of average cost. In this diagram, it also intersects with revenue and demand. And the point of this is that this firm is making what economists would describe as a normal level of profit. Any of you doing accounting? Yeah. Helpfully, this is not the same concept as accounting profit. So let's come over here. So normal profit in economics is accounting profit, which is revenue minus what economists call explicit costs, the cost of labour, the rent, the advertising, you spend money on, real money on. But it also includes opportunity costs, which is what we could have done with the assets we've used for the business instead. What would their next best alternative employment have been? I'm telling you this now, and then you can basically forget it, but just know that there's a difference between accounting and economic costs. Normal profit in economics is accounting profit plus opportunity costs. You won't have to explain that, but it's just helpful to know that that is true. Supernormal profits, when we come over here, supernormal profits are profits in excess of the normal profit. A normal profit is enough to keep a business going. It's enough to keep the owner happy. It would include dividends to the owner, a reasonable level of profit. So let's go back here. Perfectly competitive firms earn just enough profit to keep them in business. That's an important point just to tuck away at the back of your mind, because now we're going to come over here and contrast an efficient market, perfect competition, with an inefficient market, monopolies. The good news from an exam point of view is that this graph is usually referred to as a monopoly graph, but also applies to monopolistic competition and oligopoly. Same graph. That's handy. So you get, three market structures with one graph. Economies of scale right there. That's an economics joke, by the way. Oh, thank you. Thank you for that hard-hearted laugh. So this is the graph for monopolies, monopolistic competition and oligopoly. Same graph. Key things to note. We have got quite a different looking graph. Over here we've got a normal, what we might consider a normal downward sloping demand curve. This is what we're usually used to drawing for demand curves, downward sloping. For reasons I won't go into now, it's the same as average revenue. Just be aware that's the labeling. Average revenue is equal to demand. That's our downward sloping curve. We have a second downward sloping curve in this graph, which we label marginal revenue, which I don't think we did use that. Marginal revenue, MR. And in a well-drawn graph, the MR curve always intersects on this x-axis, midway between those 2 points. Mathematically, we could spend 10 minutes proving that, but you're not going to have to explain it. Just take it from me. It's always at the midway point, so be accurate with your graph. MR, midway between 0 and AR. And it's usually drawn with a section below the x-axis to show that MR can be negative, for reasons we can talk about another time. So, crucial point to know for all firms maximise their profit at the intersection where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. I'm not going to get into why today, it'd just be way too much information, but just that's a law, it's like a law of economics. All firms profit maximise at NP equals MR. Here, this is a profit maximising, perfectly competitive firm because MC, marginal cost, intersects with MR here, and that's its level of output at that price. So we've got a profit maximising, perfectly competitive firm there. But it only earns normal profit, right? Over here, we've got a firm that maximises profit at this intersection here, where MC equals MR. But we continue upwards from this point with a dotted line until it intersects with the demand curve, because that gives us the price that a monopoly firm will be able to charge for this product at the profit maximising output level. So this firm will be making Q amount of product and charging price P. But here's the interesting thing about the difference between the graphs. Here we've got average cost intersecting at the same profit maximising point. So at profit maximising output for a perfectly competitive firm, think of it as costs are equal to revenue. So we just earn a normal profit. But here we've got our AC curve well below the price we're paying. And so we can come down from this intersection point here to the AC curve here, come across, and we know for this level of output, that's the price they can charge, and that's the total cost they incur for making that level of output. Which tells us something really important and useful. It tells us that that shaded box, that shaded rectangle, is an area of what economists know as supernormal profit. So this firm is charging a price at P and is paying costs at AC, and the difference between those 2 points is effectively profit. Because at this level of output, we know their revenue is P times Q, and we know their total costs are AC times Q, so the difference must be profit. Are you happy with that? I know I'm chucking a lot at you, but are you sort of with me? Happy to go over it again? We've got, yeah, okay, all right. So the key difference, where I'm really trying to get to in a rather laborious way, is to show you that perfectly competitive firms earn a normal level of profit, enough to keep them in business, but it's nothing particularly sexy or exciting. So competition is not, new competition is not attracted into this market now. But over here, we've got a level of what we might think of as excess profits or amazingly sexy levels of profit. And this is going to attract new competition into the market. Except that for monopoly, we said, what did we say about barriers to entry? Low or high?
High.
High, very high, actually was the phrase we used. I think there are, for monopolies, for a single seller, there are typically very high barriers to entry. There are things that are keeping competition out of this market. So the point with a monopoly is if you maintain this level of excessive or supernormal profit way off into the future, because other firms can't get into the market to compete. Good examples, perhaps not monopolies, but certainly oligopolies, which are quite common in the real business world, could be firms like Coca-Cola. There are other fizzy drink makers, right? Pepsi, Schweppes, there are home brand varieties, there's other competition. But Coca-Cola spends something like, I think, $3 or $4 billion a year on advertising. And that acts as a barrier to entry. So, you know, if Mr. Lyle wants to set up a global, world-beating fizzy drink company, I've got to find $3 or $4 billion a year to spend on advertising. That's a big barrier to entry. There aren't many firms or people around with that sort of money to throw at the issue. So monopoly firms and oligopoly firms can maintain supernormal profits into the long run because there are very high barriers to entry. Over here in perfect competition, because there are no barriers to entry, if a firm starts making supernormal profit, new competition comes into the market and removes that excess profit through competition. And so all firms in perfect competition stay at normal profitability. in the long run when new firms can enter. Over here, new competition cannot enter. This is why this is an inefficient market, and we can show it actually on the graph. You've done deadweight loss, right? And CS and PS?
Yeah.
That's good news. So we can show the inefficiency in this market because, let me just get this right. So effectively this is the supply curve here, and here's our demand curve. So we've got what we might think of as like a normal equilibrium between supply and demand at this point here. Supply equals demand there, right? You can see that on the graph. So we can work out where CS and PS would be on this graph. So there's our CS. Let's call that, I don't know, call it P1. Above that price and below the demand curve is going to be CS. Can you see that for yourselves? Are you happy with that mirror? And above the cost curve, which is the supply curve, above that curve and below that red line price, that would be our PS area. So we can see where CS and PS would be on this graph. You all right? Not me, is it? Well, it's an uncomfortable feeling for somebody up in front when the audience is laughing. Well, when it's not a comedy. So we can work out actually that this area here, that red shaded area, there's our deadweight loss on the graph. So we're getting a lot of lines on here, but anyway, it's just weird. So there's our deadweight loss. And our, yeah, that's right, there's our deadweight loss. So a deadweight loss indicates that this market is not allocatively efficient. Not allocatively efficient. Whereas over here, there's no deadweight loss. This is an allocatively efficient market. At the risk of getting too many colours and things on here, for a monopoly market, there's our consumer surplus. Do you want to step out? Or? No, that's okay. For a monopoly market, there's our consumer surplus. And for a monopoly market, I'll just put the producer surplus on there too. It's not used purple, we've got that already. So the orange area, there's our producer surplus for a monopoly. So we can see that the movement from what we might describe as a perfectly competitive, allocatively efficient market at this intersection here, when we start operating at MC equals MR, we get an area of deadweight loss. That's a loss of efficiency for society. Producers are better off, PS has got bigger, and consumers are worse off because they're paying a higher price. So, that might be enough for today. So going back to the question, right? The question was about the development of the courier industry, and the question basically says, explain the change in market structure for couriers. So, in the question and the resources, we started here. I think in the 1960s there was one courier company. They operated as a monopoly, and you would have been saying, here's the graph, there's a loss of efficiency for society, there's a deadweight loss, the producers well off because they get big producer surplus, consumers miss out because they're paying a higher price. Over time, as competition enters the market, we end up, well, maybe not with perfect competition, even 3,000 firms in New Zealand's probably monopolistically competitive, but you know, that would be the benchmark that the industry would be heading towards, would be moving from monopoly to perfect competition. So that really was the guts of that question. And that was the, I mean, this is 5 weeks of work and there are bits we haven't covered, but I think they'd be some key points to know. Mira, do you want to just head out because you're just distracting us? Any questions?
When is the actual exam for this?
I don't know. Look at it. Any questions on the economics? I know it's a massive download, but is there anything you want me to go over again, or anything that was what?
Yeah, I can't find the exam paper.
It's in the link. Let's have a look. Have you found the exam paper?
Yeah.
So if you go to that NZQA link, go right down to the bottom. Yeah, that one there. Click on that. The papers are all there.
Yes.
All of this is in the slides on marginal analysis, so I think there are 90 of them or something. Good luck going through them all, but we've covered some real key points here. For passing a market structures question, you'd have to know these two graphs pretty well, especially the monopoly one. And there are some bits that we haven't really talked about for monopolistic competition, but I think that's probably enough for one day. And good luck. I'm happy to hang around for a few minutes, if you want to just sort of read through what you've got and have a think about it. And if you've got questions, I'll hang around for a few minutes. All right, no worries. See you.
I can see it as well.
Questions, Winnie?
Brian, James?
No.
Clear as mud? Crazy. Anyway, if nothing else, if you go and do eco at uni, at least you'll have heard some of the terms and seen the graph. I think if you took what we've done today and had a read of the markers onto the assessment schedule and then read an excellence exemplar, and see where we're heading with this. Once you get into it, it's not as bad as it seems. It's just you haven't done a graphs before. It's quite a bit of theory. All right, shall we leave it there?
I'll talk it the whole time.